Hey guys, TrueGreen7 here, and lately I've been really introspective about what I consider to be the best Pokemon generation. It used to be easy as a kid, but once you grow up, you know how to assess and critique. But then Sun and Moon came along and made it way harder to determine.
Did somebody say Sun and Moon?
Wait, what the hell are you doing here, Eryizo?
Well, you did show up in my Best Starter in Kalos video, so I thought I would swing by and see what's up.
Oh, well, I was actually going to collaborate with Toby on this video, considering how much information we're going to cover. But I guess you can come on for once. Give me just 1 second to break the news to Toby.
Hey man, how's it going?
Hey, Toby, you're off the video. Bye.
Oh wait, what? Hang on a sec.
Okay, you're in.
Sweet. So, what are we doing again?
So in this video we're just gonna define what a Pokemon generation is and all the components that make up a generation, just so that it would be easier to determine what is your personal favorite generation.
Oh, okay, so is what we're doing in this video like the official way to determine that? And also, would this only apply to the Western audiences?
Well, yeah, there's no real official way to determine what the best generation is, and we don't live in Japan, so what we're dealing with only applies to Western fans.
Oh yeah, we're from America. We're not from Japan.
Okay, I'm glad we established the fact that we're not Japanese. The second thing we have to talk about before dealing with the components of a generation is the task of defining what a generation is.
The main thing I think we need to address here is that there is a difference between a game and a generation, right? For example, Diamond and Pearl are not Generation 4. They are only a part of it.
Yeah, a generation is a set of Pokemon-related games and media within a time span, not a pair of games. So to a person who knows what a generation is and a person who doesn't know what a generation is, saying Generation 4 is the best generation means two totally different things.
Outside of Japan, Generation 3 took place between mid-2003 and mid-2007. So anything released between that is a part of Generation 3. Even remakes of games from a previous generation, like Fire Red and Leaf Green.
So just thinking that Ruby and Sapphire are the best games doesn't mean that you automatically think Generation 3 is the best, because you have to put Pokemon Emerald, Fire Red and Leaf Green, Colosseum, and every other aspect of that specific generation into the mix.
To determine how good a generation is, you have to look at the success of each component within that generation. So we thought long and hard and came up with 10 components. Long and hard.
We took these 10 components and put them in order of importance to the success of the Pokemon franchise. That's 10 aspects of a generation that must be considered when determining what is your favorite generation. I'll use a tree to illustrate these components so they don't get too confusing, since each component has components of their own.
Oh, we're using a tree? That's great, because I've been saving up these tree puns for the longest time now, and I can't wait to treat you to them. Huh? I don't know. Did that sound forced?
Yeah, it did, so no puns. It's more of an upside down tree anyways, so just buckle in and be ready to hear the word component a billion times. Number 1. The first component out of 10, and in our opinion the most important one, is the brand new main series games.
In order to determine the success of a brand new main series game, we have to take a look at all the components of the game itself. But that's where all the controversy and disagreements stem from. Okay, I promise that's the last one.
While there's an order of importance to the components of a generation, and it's disputed that the first and most important component is the new main series game, there really isn't a definitive order of importance to what makes a Pokemon game great. Of course, the first few components that we will talk about seem to be the most important, but the rest are pretty subjective and contribute to the games in a huge way as well. So it really is up to preference when it comes to determining what makes a Pokemon game enjoyable.
So we'll just list all the factors and components within a new game, and you can determine what you deem to be more important.
The first component of a game is the region. It's considered to be the most important factor of a main series Pokemon game because it dictates your journey, the kind of Pokemon and characters you will meet, and overarching themes of that particular game. For example, we wouldn't be able to get a fine, barely clothed character like Olivia in a region like Sinnoh. It's too cold there, so points for Alola.
Another example would be how in Generation 6 we got X and Y, which took place in Kalos, a region based on France. The French vibe we get from the Pokemon and characters of that region represent the overall theme of Generation 6, which is beauty. as well as dices en la vie, which are arguably what makes things beautiful. Yeah, the French really do know how to make life and death sound less serious.
The second component of a new main series game is the Pokemon introduced. Now, just like how a generation has multiple components, one of them being the main series game, which also has multiple components, one of them being the Pokemon introduced, so do the new Pokemon have multiple components. And once again, their order is subjective.
These components are its design, origin, lore, and even how good a specific Pokemon is in competitive battle. And that's the thing, some people like Pokemon with cool or cute designs, others don't care if they're butt frickin' ugly as long as they're good in battle.
You see, Diggersby, you have some redeeming qualities. The rest of the components that make a new main series game come in no particular order and therefore are the reason we don't all agree on what the best Pokemon game is.
One factor is the relationship between Pokemon and region, or how many of the Pokemon could believably inhabit the new region. For example, a lot of the Alola Pokemon are considered successful because they look like they would live in a tropical archipelago.
The next component is the characters in the game. Do they affect the plot? Are they multidimensional? Do they go through character development like N? Or are they challenging like Cynthia and Red? Do they have an impact on the overall franchise? There are so many factors that make a Pokemon character great or terrible.
Like Wally.
Hey, I think Wally's actually a pretty well-developed character.
Yeah, I just didn't really think he was that good of a rival compared to people like Blue, and his overall storyline was pretty boring.
I guess that proves how subjective these components are.
After characters comes gameplay advancements. These are basically updated features that make the game much more enjoyable to play, like the physical special split in Generation 4.
Then we have gameplay additions. What are entirely new features that we cannot believe we were able to live without? Mega Evolution in Generation 6 or Poke Rides in Generation 7 are just a few that come to mind.
One component that is very controversial is the story or plot of the game. Some people think it's the most important aspect, while others are indifferent. Is the new villainous team entertaining, and are their plans groundbreaking? Does this game expand on the existing lore of the Pokemon games, or does the plot just ruin the pacing of your journey? Stupid Team Flare.
A huge component for me that may be the least important aspect of the games for many players is the music. I think the game's soundtrack is incredibly important. It has to perfectly match every situation, character, or location, all while sounding fresh. Pokemon has always been known for its above-average music.
Difficulty is also a big deal. Is the game too easy, or is it despicably hard? Okay, it's a Pokemon game, so it's never despicably hard.
And last but not least, the post-game. To many, the post-game contributes to a big percentage of your motivation to continue playing the games after you defeated the champion. Some Pokemon games have very expansive post-games that'll leave you playing for tens or hundreds of hours, while some are only satisfying for competitive battlers.
But there is a bonus component that only adds points to the game, and that's whether or not it has a direct sequel like Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. This feature expands the world, characters, and story of that game, so it doesn't hurt to have sequels. Am I right, Game Freak? That means you should do more.
And those are all the components of a new main series game, but don't forget that the main series game was just the first of 10 factors that go into a generation and determining its success.
The second and third components within a generation were actually discussed as also being components of a main series game. Those are the region introduced and the new Pokemon introduced. The reason they are also factors for the generation as a whole is because they will affect the theme and overall vibe of the generation. The new region determines the new Pokemon, which promote the generation as a whole. For example, most of the Pokemon in Alola are inspired by Hawaii, so regardless of what game comes after Sun and Moon, Generation 7 will always have a Hawaiian vibe.
The fourth component of a generation is whether or not it has a remake within it. Now, to be clear, remakes are main series games and belong to the generation that they are released in. Fire Red and Leaf Green are Generation 3 games, and Heart Gold and Soul Silver are Generation 4 games. And how good they are affects the rating of their generation. So if you liked Oras, it could boost your opinion of Hoenn and Generation 3 Pokemon, but it doesn't affect Generation 3 itself, but rather your rating of Generation 6. Yeah, this is a little confusing.
A lot of components. Anyways, a good remake can have a good balance between old and new features, as well as an integration of new mechanics into the actual plot, like how Mega Evolution was incorporated into the story of Oras.
The graphical jump between the old versions of the game and the new one is also cool to see. And what are the new mechanics introduced in the remake that weren't in the main series game from that specific generation? Like how all Pokemon walk behind you in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but in Diamond and Pearl and Platinum they do not.
So basically, whatever can be experienced in the remakes but not the originals are definitely factored into the rank of the generation in which the remakes are released. Like having Pokemon following you, Game Freak.
Yeah, I've seen the Sun and Moon data mines, Game Freak. I know that you have walking Pokemon. Give them to us!
Yeah, give it to us, you piece of
The fifth component would be the metagame, which is admittedly only super important starting from Generation 4. After the internet became a huge thing, competitive battling is a huge part of Pokemon media and online entertainment, so Game Freak has to consider new moves, abilities, items, and even new types to introduce in order to balance and enhance the metagame. It also helps if they develop a new way to make competitive battling more accessible and less tedious to hone. Looking back, each game gets better and better in regards to the metagame, except for Festival Plaza. That sucks.
The sixth component would be side games. These are spin-off Pokemon games that interact with the core series games, like Pokemon Stadium or Coliseum. You can actually transfer Pokemon between the side series games and the main game, but if the game has an actual plot and unique mechanics, it only serves as extra points for that generation.
The seventh component would be all the spin-off games, like Mystery Dungeon and even Pokemon Go.
Yes, Pokemon Go counts, shut up.
Yeah, but most of them do have huge spins on the classic formula and give a breath of fresh air to anybody who gets tired once in a while of the main game journey. It's pretty hard to give set rules in order to judge them since they're all so different from each other.
Now the next four components aren't a part of the video game franchise but influence the success of Pokemon as a whole and allow for the continuation of the series. A lot of people have been introduced to the series by these extra components, so if they are good, people seem to be more fond of the generation as a whole.
The eighth component is the anime. It really is a huge aspect of the franchise, and many hardcore fans were introduced to Pokemon through the anime, like me. It's one of the many reasons why Pokemon is an international phenomenon. If you enjoy the anime, you get interested in the game, so to rate the anime within a certain generation, we'd have to include how entertaining Ash's companions are, Ash's competence in battle, and pretty much every other situation, the quality of animation, the inclusion of ongoing story arcs, like in X and Y, and how much of the game's storyline is integrated into the anime.
Now another famous component of Pokemon is our ninth factor, the TCG. The card game is a big deal among many fans, and just like the anime, people were introduced to this franchise by these beautiful cards.
To a lesser extent, our 10th entry is the manga. Some people don't even know they exist, and they don't really contribute to the success of the franchise since they are the product of Pokemon's popularity and not vice versa. So they're pretty much here because some people like them a lot and would include them among the many things that determine whether or not the generation is enjoyable for them.
Now we do have a bonus component, which is the amount of events that take place during a generation. For example, Pokemon's 20th anniversary took place during Generation 6, and many events followed during that time, allowing for fans to enjoy the franchise even more.
But that's the thing about rating Pokemon generations. There are just so many minute things that a person can enjoy that another fan wouldn't even consider. One aesthetic feature like customizable characters can make many people think that Pokemon X and Y are the best games ever. If that person doesn't do any competitive battling, then they would prioritize that over the stats of various Pokemon.
Some people just get attached to particular games, even though they know another Pokemon game is better, and that's what makes Pokemon such a great franchise. All Pokemon games and therefore generations are enjoyable, so even if you determine what your favorite generation is, you probably still love the other ones as well.
So thank you guys for watching, and I hope we helped you out quite a bit. If you enjoyed how we analyzed the makeup of a generation, I urge you to go check out the video we both did on Eryizo's channel, in which we analyzed the Generation 6 starters and determined which one of them is the best. If you came from Eryizo's video, then check out the bottom video, cause it's better than this one.
It sure is. Check out my vids.